Hi everyone. I'm Samat, and a disclaimer slide, something about forward-looking statements in case we don't make purchasing decisions based on anything I say, et cetera, et cetera. And the text runs off the bottom of the slide, so that's how much I care about this. Today we're going to be talking about Ingest Actions. So a quick question, how many people were at Conf and saw the talk there? Great, that means all this is new to you. Okay, you were at that talk? Okay, no problem. So this is basically the Conf presentation with a bit more depth. And then we've switched from the video demo to a live one. Hopefully we can deliver a live demo successfully. We're in the Splunk office, but we'll see what happens. Divya, you want to give background about yourself?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Divya Vijayan. I'm a software engineer at Splunk. I have been working at Splunk for the last 1.5 years, and right now I'm working with the Ingest Actions team.
And I'm Samat. I'm a principal software engineer, and I've been with Splunk since 2017. Most of the time I worked on index or clustering, where hopefully I fixed more bugs than made. But other projects I've worked on are bundle push, bundle replication, smart store, the Python 3 migration. And for the past year, I've been working on the S3 output that's part of Ingest Actions. I want to give a quick shout out to Felix and Izzy, who are the PMs for Ingest Actions, because most of the slide deck is theirs and I'm stealing it. And also to Russ, who is actually, I believe, doing the same Ingest Actions presentation for other locations. And I've stolen some of his slides as well. So fluffy stuff, data, let's philosophically talk about it. There's a correlation between the age of data and the value of data. And generally, as data gets older, it becomes less valuable. Splunk is really useful when you have data that's real time, or near real time, and then necessarily has some high value associated with it. Usually these logs are relatively low value. Because data is sort of separated in this way, there's like a natural tiering effect. There's a pyramid thingy where on the top, it's the low volume, high value data. At the bottom is the high volume, low value data. So I think the previous Splunk methodology here was just put everything into Splunk and just pay the Splunk license fee for it. But the thing is, the reality of data is that it does fit into tiers. It doesn't make sense to pay for the same features. You don't need the same capabilities for all types of data. So in terms of like features and product portfolio, this is from like a storage perspective. A couple of years ago, you could export data into Hadoop and do searches there. Internally, if you're a Splunk Cloud customer, there are features like DDSS and DDAA, which work on bucket freezing. There's also Flex Index, another Splunk Cloud feature they can put low value data into. We also now have Ingest Actions S3 output. This is our S3 RFS in this diagram here. And then syslog's eternal. So you can always export the syslog and put it somewhere else. So we're going to be talking about the Ingest Actions aspect of this today. So my people were talking about before Ingest Actions, what could you do? You could always manually write props and transforms stuff, but you have to handwrite stuff. You have to know what magic incantation that does this and that. You have to manage deployment yourself. If you're writing a regular expression, you have to go test it in some external tool like Regex 101 and then hope Splunk works the same way. For example, if you want to do a dropping type of use case, you have to put these magic incantations about null queue. Make sure you capitalize the queue, by the way. It doesn't work if you don't. You just have to know all this stuff. It's a lot of lore on Splunk answers, etc. So here we have Ingest Actions. What Ingest Actions is that it's a new UI on top of a lot of existing functionality with a lot of backend enhancements to enable new functionality. And the three main things that we're saying you can do with Ingest Actions are filtering data, which Also say drop is that you want to remove events that are uninteresting from data stream. Is it cool if we take questions? Yeah, I can take questions. Yes. I'll point out some of the newer stuff, and I'm going to it's one of the slide at the end of the talk. So we can also do what we call masking, where you change the content of the event. Say you want to remove PII, keys, mask usernames or IP addresses. You can do both of those two without a UI before. Again, you had to do everything manually. There's a UI for it now. And the net new thing is that you can do routing of events. So you can send events to a different Splunk index. You can say that it's low value data and just want to write to S3, so on and so forth. And one benefit of the UI is that it helps you do rapid prototyping. So that you want to test your regular expression and against your data stream, the UI just lets you type a regular expression, you can test that. So one of the value we're trying to deliver here is that you have less iteration time when you're writing these rule sets. You don't have to worry about deployment. And we're delivering the Ingest Actions free, so it can run an existing Splunk enterprise infrastructure. You'll probably wonder why we're doing this. So again, data can fall into this data tiering pyramid thing. That is that as Splunk, we want you to keep inputting as much high value data as you can and be able to take out the low value stuff and still be able to access and use it later. And don't have to rely on external tools, that kind of thing. One really unique thing that Ingest Actions is great at is for compliance use cases. We'll expand on use cases when I say compliance. Say you have data coming in and you have a set of Splunk users. You don't want necessarily to have access to all their original data, say usernames and IP addresses. You can use Ingest Actions to mask that data and also save the original copy to say S3 if you ever need it for compliance purposes. So where you can use Ingest Actions. As mentioned, it's free. It works if you have ingest-based licensing, workload pricing, or SVCs or in Splunk Cloud. In terms of where you can use it pretty much any node type if you're a Splunk Enterprise user. And then in cloud, it works on Victorious experience stacks and classic stacks. As long as you're not on GCP, and I believe FedRAMP support shipped in 8.2 2203, so it's available there. In terms of where do you actually use the UI, in Splunk Cloud, you just do it on the search head, which will just operate on the indexing tier. But if you're a Splunk Enterprise user, you have two options. You can run an indexing tier or the forwarding tier. With that, we're actually going to do the demo in the middle, then we'll take a deep dive. Divya.
Thank you so much, Samat. So before starting with the demo, I wanted to talk about the Splunk architecture I will be using for the demo. So I have a forwarding tier setup, which has a deployment server, which is managing managing some heavyweight forwarders. And I have an indexing tier, which consists of an indexer cluster and a searcher and a single searcher, which is using the Splunk Cloud. And mainly for this demo, I'm going to use the deployment server and the Splunk searcher, just using the Splunk Cloud. And last one is I want to route the events using Ingest Actions to AWS S3. So I'm using AWS S3 and I've created a bucket inside the S3 so that I can store the events after routing. Now, yeah. Yep. So just before starting the demo, so I just wanted to explain about the scenario. So what is the scenario or what is the problem that I'm trying to resolve using Ingest Actions? So currently I have some AWS CloudTrail logs coming to my Splunk deployment. And if you know about CloudTrail logs, it mainly has some information about some services we used or some operations that we or actions we performed. So it may be something like we ran some instances, we stopped some instances, or we terminated some instances. These might not seem like at the moment it doesn't seem useful to me. So and the events are getting ingested every second. So the ingestion volume is getting higher. So I don't want to I just want to route this low value data to S3 so that in future, if I want, I can use it for maybe some auditing purpose or something like that. So that is the scenario. And also, if as Samat mentioned, if if the data has some like user identity information like an access key or secret key or IP address, I want to mask that before it is getting stored into the Splunk index or S3. So these are the use cases that or the problems that I'm trying to resolve using Ingest Actions. So let me get started with the demo. So I have a Splunk Cloud Searcher over here. So I'm going to create a destination first. So go to destination tab, create new destination. So within the UI, some of them are optional fields. So one of the main fields is we have to provide a S3 bucket name. So in Splunk Cloud, if we create a bucket name, if we create a bucket, the bucket name should have a bucket prefix, which is the Splunk Cloud account name. So for this deployment, the account name is this. So I'm just going to copy paste here. So usually the deployment, so the account name with these random numbers will be underneath the S3 bucket name text box. I'm just going to copy paste. And if I want to, oh, is it fine? Okay, so this is the bucket prefix. So if I want to say route the events to a bucket called audit, maybe I can use it for later for auditing purpose. I will just name it as audit. And I have to specify another S3 folder, which is inside this bucket. So say I'm going to create a folder named AWS Cloud Trial -logs. So tree logs. Yep. So I filled up the folder. Now I'm going to advanced options. So how do I want to store the events? Should I encrypt them? I don't want to encrypt them right now. And should I compress the events? So I'm just going to select the ZSTD option for now. And now if you see within this pop-up, we are not asking for any S3 authentication details. So if you were in an on-prem instance, there could have been options to actually use the IAM role or the access key secret key to authenticate to S3. So, but if you see in this Splunk Cloud Searcher, we are not asking for any of those details. So how are we going to authenticate? So for that, so if I'm not changing anything and if I just try to test the connection to S3, it will fail. So how are we going to authenticate? So we have an option called generate bucket policy. So we click on this button to generate the bucket policy. We copy the policy. Now we go to the bucket. Oh, sorry, I think the session expired. I have to reload. Just give me a second. Oh. I might need my mobile actually to authenticate.
Do we have any questions so far? Just wondering, what's the, sure. That's exactly what I was going to explain. Right now, no, the expectation is that you do so yourself and then you attach a bucket policy. So if Splunk was going to, so the bucket that's in use here is not a Splunk owned bucket. It's one that resides in your AWS account. So you need to get permission for Splunk to access your AWS account and create a bucket if we're going to do something like that. So the idea here is what's the minimum amount of permissions that you can get data out of Splunk and then store in your account. Other questions? Right now, so for Splunk Cloud, it has to be AWS in the same region. For Splunk Enterprise, actually can be any S3-like API provider. So you could use GCP or Azure in AWS compatibility mode, or I've used Minio, etc. Yes, exactly. So the internals underneath are the same as Smart Store. So whatever Smart Store supports, you can do the Ingest Actions. Caveat there, Smart Store supports GCP and Azure. Ingest Actions doesn't. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say the word yet. Am I ready?
Okay, yeah. So I have my bucket set up in the AWS S3, and within my bucket, there is the S3 folder. And I have to, if you remember, I copied the bucket policy, and now I have to paste that into the bucket settings. So go to permissions, bucket policy, edit, paste, save changes. Okay. Now if I try to test the connection, it is successful. So now I'm able to create a destination. So I can save that, and will ask me to deploy the changes. So since right now I'm in a search it, so it will, if I click on the deploy, it will basically deploy this settings into the indexers in the indexer cluster. So now it's deployed, and now I can create a rule set. So click on rule set, new rule set. Now, so we create rule sets per source type. So for this, it's for the data that I want to route to AWS S3, which is the AWS CloudTrail logs. So I have the source type as AWS CloudTrail. Now, if I click on the sample, it will give me the sample data. So let me just minimize, probably be better. So yeah, this is how the data looks like. So it will give out a sample of around 100 events. So I can also check how these events are getting ingested into the Splunk index. So let's say my index is main and the events are coming to main index. So you could see that source type as AWS CloudTrail. So the events are coming, and some of the interesting fields to note here are the event name. So as I mentioned, these CloudTrail logs, I'm basically having some logs about running instances, terminating instances, which doesn't seem useful to me at the moment. So I want to say, let's say I want to route the run instance logs and maybe start instance logs to the bucket that I created in AWS S3. So how can I do that? So right now I have a sample. Now I click on add rule. So I want to route to a destination. So I choose the option route to destination. And the route to destination is will be based on some conditions. So either the condition can be none, means all the events which will match that source type will be routed to that bucket. And I can use either a regex or an eval expression, which is the ingest eval expression, to route the events. So I'm just going to use the regex for now for the demo. So I'm just going to copy an instance, and or if it's a start instance logs, I want to route it to my bucket. So that's my simple regular expression. And where should I send it to? Right now it's defaultly added as Splunk index. I don't want to send into an index. I want to send it to AWS S3. Select the AWS S3 and click on apply. So it will show me like there were 100 events which is taken as a sample, out of which 26 matches my condition. So if you see for start instances, all these events are having this keyword start instances. So that will match the regex. So, and this is a sample. Actually, whatever events matches this condition will be routed to that S3 bucket. Now, there is another option called clone events. So if I toggle this button, what happens is that it will create a clone of this event stream, and that will be a brand new set of logs. So you can apply more rules, whatever you want. There are more rule options over here. So I will just show you the mask with regular expression. So let's say I want to mask the events where events with user access key IDs. So I don't want to expose the user key IDs to everyone, because multiple users are going to see this event. So I don't want to expose it to everyone. There. So see user access key, you could see key ID. So yeah, you could see over here. So these are the access key values that events are having. So I'm just going to create a regex to mask these out. So I have just a regex ready over here. Just going to copy, paste this regex. Now I want to mask it with some particular value. So just copying it. Now, if I click on apply, I could see that all the access key values got masked off, and it got replaced with the redacted word that I applied. So this way, if there is anything we want to mask, like a sensitive access key, secret key, or IP address, or some user data, you could do that with Ingest Actions. So now I've added all the rules I wanted. Now I will save the rules. It will again ask for deploying across the indexes. So I will click on deploy. So it's saying the deployment is initiated. So we might have to wait a minute or so to get to see that coming to my bucket. So if I go immediately and check my bucket, there is nothing inside my S3 folder. So it takes a minute or so. So meanwhile, if you have any questions or anything, I can answer. So I'm adding it right now to a Splunk Cloud Searcher. So it will be, once I click on the deploy, it will be deployed to the indexes. Yeah.
Diagram. So an index is, the question was, if we're routing stuff, does it mean do indexes live in different storage areas? So an index is a Splunk concept, and how you do the routing has nothing to do with indexes. So you could create destinations, it's up to you, that say only data from a certain index is there, or say maybe data from multiple indexes going to one destination. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. One thing to point out is that Ingest Actions, the talk today is only about the writing stuff to a bucket. We're not talking about searching yet, which is another feature called federated search. Let's leave that for later. All right.
So now if I check my S3 folder, I could see that my events have started coming. So how the directory structure is that, what is the, based on the date of the event. So right now it's year. Now within that year, which month it was recorded, now which day. So if I go inside, I could see that the compressed ZST format JSONs have been added to my directory. So if I click on one particular ZST file, I can download it, extract it, and I could use that again, the data again. So if I don't want to do the extraction right now, but I have some samples extracted already. So if you look at the JSON file, which is extracted, which is the output file, basically, it will have a format like this, which is basically a format of the head JSON. Oh, yeah. Mm. Is that better? Okay. Yeah. So the event got converted into a format like this, which is similar to the hex JSON hex input format. So it has the times, host, source type, everything recorded along with the event. Any questions?
Yes, could you repeat your question again? So if you're asking if we use clone continue, does it show up in the Splunk index as well as S3? Or? Right. Was it masked? Okay. Sure. So what the rules that we set up are is that first we had a route rule, which means any events that are there, route them to S3. So say we still want those events to live in the Splunk index. We click the clone button, which means in addition to routing to S3, clone it so that we can apply more rules. And then we put a mask rule there that says get rid of access key. And what will end up happening on S3 is that everything will be unredacted, but everything in the Splunk index will be redacted. So that is, if you have a lot of Splunk users using your Splunk stuff, it's safe for them to do searches. Yes. I think this is an example of like the compliance use cases that you need to archive stuff somewhere.
Yeah. I can show you how the data looks like in the Splunk index actually. So the data was getting indexed into the main index. So now if I check it, so the user identity field, now the access keys are redacted. So yeah. This is the data that has been cloned into the index. Yeah. So when I route a particular route the events to a particular location, that is done. So if I want to apply more rules, I clone it, and again, whatever I want to do, I do on top of that. Yeah, right. Yep. We have two configurations, right?
On Splunk Cloud, it's not configurable because they alter the performance of things. But if you're a Splunk Enterprise customer, you can configure either the file size or what we're calling a batch timeout, which is like the longest amount of time that we'll wait. So say the default batch timeout's 30 seconds, which means we'll wait 30 seconds. And if no more events come in after 30 seconds, we'll write out to S3. And the other criteria is that if we hit, say, I think in the default's 2 megabytes for this release. If we get 2 megabytes before we hit the 30 seconds, then write it out.
Totally fine. Sure. All questions are welcome. Now, so that is the example that I wanted to show you in the Splunk search, cloud searcher. Now I can actually demo the same feature in the deployment server. So I have the deployment server running here. So can do the same thing. What the advantage with the deployment server is that even before the events get indexed into an index, I can apply the rules. So so deployment server does not have an option to, in deployment server, I don't have an option to create destinations. So I can create rule sets still. So this is an on-prem deployment server. So going to create a new rule set. Say, I want to apply the rules to the same source type. So it will be AWS cloud trail. So another thing with the deployment server is that I don't have an option to view the events. So since the data is coming to the deployment server, we have to live preview it. So we don't have that option yet. So there is no way that I can see what the sample looks like or something like that, but I can still add the rules, whatever I want. So say right now the events are coming to the main index. Maybe I can route it to a different index. So I can change the index using the set index feature. So again, there are different options, like I can use a no condition, rejects, eval, or you can actually enter an existing index. Say the index name is like my index. Apply and save. This also takes a little bit of time to get updated into the index. I can check. So I can go back into my Splunk Cloud Searcher. I should be able to see the events in my index. Take some time. So if you have some other questions.
Yeah, limitations at the moment. We were writing the rules on a deployment server, and you click deploy, they'll be sent to the heavyweight forwarders. Right now, you can't configure any destinations on the deployment server. You have to go to each heavyweight forwarder and do it yourself. The reason for that is deployment server doesn't have a way of like transmitting secrets. So this is the whole security conscious thing. We don't want to have like your access key and secret key on disk anywhere. But it does work. You can fork data like that. But the UI has hiccups because of security stuff. Mm-hmm. No, they cannot. And we'll get to the architecture side about why not. It has to be cooked data. So Ingest Actions is only going to run on indexers or heavyweight forwarders. Right now, we're hoping that you set up a special deployment server that's only for Ingest Actions, and then you configure which heavyweight forwarders are talking to it. I think Phil is still trying to figure out like the best deployment strategies for various reasons. It actually seems like having another heavyweight forwarder tier that just runs Ingest Actions may make sense. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the event started coming to my index. So now it's the same thing. So it was coming previously to main index. Now it started coming to my index, and I could see that the rules I applied even in the Splunk searcher, it's getting applied over here. I could see that the user access key ID is still getting redacted. So the rules are working fine. Yep, that's mostly about the demo. You have any other questions?
It's not so. It's actually not pushing. It's writing a special app called Splunk Ingest Actions, and then the heavyweight forwarders are pulling that. And if you're wondering, it's like it seems like there should be preview there. There is new protocols in progress. Yes. Mm-hmm. I don't have those numbers. I think Feed will have them at some point. The default object size. So the thing is, it depends. I have to do the math. One thing is that all the events are buffered in memory, so then it also depends on how much memory your heavyweight forwarder indexer has. So yeah, it depends. Yes. Mm-hmm. There are multiple threads, but the thing is when we decide to make up, say, we're calling them partitions or batches, which is all the events in one file, that decision single threaded usually is the limit. But if you're able to have high throughput of that decision, you can still have each heavyweight forwarder uploading in parallel. So it's a big, it depends, unfortunately. Okay, cool. Okay, so that was it for the demo. So now we're going to go into what actually happened here behind the scenes. I think we're out of time, and I think I need 15 minutes more for the rest of the slides. How are folks feeling? Okay. So I'm a Linux person, Divya, so I have no idea where the slides are. People laugh at me when I use a Mac. So when we were writing rule sets, you may have noticed that there was a big preview config button in the corner. So it does what it says. You can click it, you can see what's actually going on behind the scenes. So when you, this is an example of a rule that is sending Splunk D to both S3 and then to the internal index. So there's a lot of stuff here. Have folks used ingest eval before? It's one of those black art Splunk D things that was introduced 7.2. It lets you do all kinds of manipulations on event data structures as they're going through, and this is what Ingest Actions uses. There's a bunch of new stuff here like rule set and stop processing if. So that gets, let's first talk about where is this configuration written. So if you're on a search head or a cluster master, it's going to be written in manager apps in a Splunk Ingest Actions app. So one thing to notice, you notice that we were writing rules on a search head. What actually is going on there is the search head will proxy to the cluster manager and then write it to the right place so they can get deployed to the indexer cluster. So you don't have to give users access to your cluster manager. Search heads are fine. If you're in a standalone, which includes heavyweight forwarders, you can use the UI there and it just writes into Splunk Ingest Actions inside etc. apps. And if you're on a deployment server, to your question, Becky, it writes it to a Splunk Ingest Actions app in etc. deployment apps. And then when the heavyweight forwarders reach out to the deployment server, they pull that new app that's been written there. So what's actually in this app is that we have props and transforms stuff. Props has a new rule set thing, and I'm just going to summarize. It works the exact same as transforms, but when it gets executed is different. There's also a stop processing if, which is an implementation detail for the UI. That is, if you have multiple transforms or rule sets for source type. Previously, if this is something you'll run into if you're fiddling with the conf files, there's no way to say, stop processing something, don't execute any more transforms or rule sets. This new stop processing if supports that. For writing out to S3, there's new stuff in outputs.conf. You can have these RFS colon stanzas, which then define RFS destinations. Here's an example of writing to an S3 bucket, and there you can specify the key, like access key, secret key. So I'm mentioning the conf file here because if you're on a siloed instance or Nixer cluster, use the UI, it makes things a lot easier. But if you're doing like a mass configuration deployment, the conf file is easier. So this is what it looks like. If you folks have used Smart Store, almost all the settings that Smart Store supports are actually supported here as well, other than say Azure and GCP. So we introduced this. Sorry, what's up? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. I believe not. We don't support multiple cluster managers yet. I might have to double check that for you. Remind me after the meeting. Yeah, so on-prem, you can use a CM, which is acting as a search head or the search head, and in Splunk Cloud, you only have access to the search head. So this is new rule set thing, and what it differs with transforms is like when and where does it execute. So the new thing about rule set is that it always executes. So if you had TAs that were processing data with the transforms before, you couldn't use transforms to go and keep changing data, but you can now use Ingest Actions rule set to do that. There's this idea I'm taking from one of the SE architects that describes something called a parse boundary. Once data hits that particular node and it gets parsed, that's the only place that transforms can execute. But the new thing about rule set is that once you're past that boundary, rule set can keep executing in every layer afterward. So if you had something like a universal forwarder sending stuff to a heavyweight forwarder, which is sending on stuff to an indexer, you can run Ingest Actions on the heavyweight forwarder and the indexer simultaneously. You can both do different things. There are a lot of interactions with TAs, and since we're in a hurry, I want to save that for a Q&A later. So if folks remember the Masa diagram, it explains how Splunk works internally. So I've updated it for 9.0. And the net new stuff is that in the typing pipeline, register placement processors, what does rule set and transforms handling? In the indexing pipeline, that's where the output S3 lives. It's before we index anything to disk. And then in the lower left, there's a new rule set pipeline. So the reason we have this is that if you have data coming from a heavyweight forwarder, normally it would have gone into the indexing queue directly, but it now goes into this rule set queue, which is a special regex processor that only does rule set. That supports all the functionality we had in the previous slide. So you might be asking what actually is on S3. So Divya showed that earlier. And just to highlight, the default is Z standard compressed JSON files. And basically there's a bunch of stuff in there that helps make sure the file names are unique. It's like the latest event and latest time and earliest time of the events that are in that batch, the upload time, the GUID of the peer that uploaded it, and the sequence number. If you actually look at what's in these JSON files, it's a file format that we're calling HEC-JSON. So we didn't really mean to invent a format, but the idea here is that you could take any one of these files and curl it to say Splunk's HEC ingestion, and it'll look as if the event just came in fresh and new. So it's great for sort of like replay. So you have everything here to reconstruct how your ingestion originally went. So it might be asking, so how do we know what's actually going on? So metrics, unfortunately, are disabled by default for 9.0 and until some future release. But you can put this stuff into transform.conf to turn them on. And once you turn them on, you see in metrics.log all these statistics about each of your rule sets. Say you have a really nasty irregular expression that takes a lot of CPU seconds, you can turn the metrics on and see which of your rules are doing that. Likewise, you can see how many events are hitting it, what's the number of bytes that are getting processed. etc. So just to summarize everything we just said, one of the new things about rule set is the stop processing if, that you can stop processing rules. We've added a new rule set pipeline, which unfortunately means there's one more thing that you have to monitor, but it does support Ingest Actions functionality. And there's a new RFS pipeline that was created for operating the S3. And the thing is, even though it's a separate pipeline, you still have to worry about back pressure issues if there's, say, a write problem to S3. So if you guys want to go ahead and use Ingest Actions, you just have to download Splunk 9.0, just click the free Splunk button, and then settings, Ingest Actions, and then you'll see the rule set and destinations UI. Go on from there. And if you're a Splunk Cloud customer, just make sure you have both the list ingest rule set and ingest rule set capabilities. So like I mentioned, this presentation is mostly the same thing. We did a conf a bit more depth, so it's worth highlighting what's new. We've been adding new features in the 9.0.x releases. I think a lot of stuff was already there. We're just turning the UI on for them. That, for example, you can now route events to a different index. Divya showed that in her demo. There's a health report for S3 destination. So if something's wrong with writing to S3, you don't have to go digging splunk.log. You have the little icon there show you that something wrong, the ingestion pipeline. And I guess 9.0.2 went out today. So I can say that multiple S3 destinations are now supported. I didn't mention before, but we had a limitation that you can only write to one destination at a time, which really means only one bucket, and all your source type indexes have to go into one place. You can now create multiple and then put source types in different places, different buckets, etc. So that is what I had for tonight. Do we have other questions? What's up? Great question, because there is no limit, and you make me wonder if we should put one. So no limit. The idea of mine, so it's ingest eval isn't, say, like imperative programming language. It's hard to do branches. The idea of clone continued helps you do branches on your data pipeline, and we don't have any limit on how many you can have. Other questions? Okay, I think that's it for tonight. Oh. Mm-hmm. Have to say really general. If all these stars align, you will max out gigabit Ethernet, no problem, indexing at the same time. Did you want other specifics? Mm-hmm. So that's assuming that you don't have, say, a complex regular expression or doing complex masking, etc. rules. I think generally, so filtering your dropping data. So you usually actually get a general performance increase. Masking and routing, again, depends what you're doing. There'll be usually, slowdown is usually not measurable. It depends what you're doing. So that gets to what I mentioned about back pressure. So the indexing is actually going to be the slowest step. And I think that tops out on maybe 15 to 20 megabytes a second. So because if you're saying cloning to S3 and to an index, the fact that the indexing is only going at 20 megabytes a second means you can only write to S3 at 20 megabytes a second, because the input's going to slow down to match that. But if you're doing something where you're only writing, say, a subset to an index and then sending bulk data out to S3, then the performance numbers change. You can probably get more. I think the use case there's you have application logs. You want your, say, info and warn to go to a Splunk index, but then you want to just dump all your debug on S3 because you don't want to eating up your Splunk license. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. So right now you can only write to raw, say when you're doing like a masking. But you can, I believe there's an option there for writing an arbitrary eval statement. So you could pull from other fields and write them into raw. So you want to filter based on, say, an index time field? Yeah. It's not, this is the whole future stuff. You can't do fields yet. So you can't say a regex against a field. Yes, raw is the only thing supported at the moment. Not allowed to say, but if it seems like there are obvious gaps, we know that there are obviously gaps. Other questions? So I guess we're good for tonight. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, that was a very interesting talk and demo. And that's all I have for now. But I do have some swag. Oh, what? Oh yeah, recording, Manan. Can you stop the recording before we record the swag?